I have the great pleasure of introducing our keynote, Dr. Temple Grandin. Dr. Grandin is one of the most accomplished and well-known adults in the world with autism. Dr. Grandin's fascinating life was brought to the screen in 2010 in the HBO production full-length film Temple Grandin, which claimed 7 Emmy Awards, including Outstanding Made-for-TV Movie. She's been featured on NPR, major television programs such as BBC, the BBC special, The Woman Who Thinks Like a Cow, ABC's Primetime Live, The Today Show, Larry King Live, 48 Hours, and 2020, and has been written about in many national publications such as Time Magazine, People Magazine, Forbes, US News, and World Report, the New York Times. This will be Temple's 4th appearance here at the USAAA conference. Dr. Grandin didn't talk until she was 3.5 years old, communicating her frustration instead by screaming, peeping, and humming. In 1950, she was diagnosed with autism, and her parents were told she should be institutionalized. There will be a book signing after a presentation today, and actually, Temple is going to present for about an hour today, and then we're going to have a one-on-one interview for the last half hour that I hope you'll enjoy. She's also authored books, The Way I See It, A Personal Look at Autism and Asperger's, Unwritten Rules of Social Relationships, Animals Make Us Human, Animals in Translation, Thinking in Pictures, Emergence Labeled Autistic, and produced several DVDs. All books and DVDs are available at the Future Horizons stand out in the expo. So please welcome Dr. Temple Grandin.
Well, it's great to be here. I got to get the water down here away from the computer because I believe in the separation of water and electronics. I think that's something everybody can agree on that. And when I was a little kid, I had all the full-blown symptoms of autism, no speech, and I was very lucky to get into very good speech therapy when I was 2.5 years old. And that's not me, but I had a teacher that's worked with me. She had a little nursery school. We did a lot of turn-taking games. I can't emphasize enough the importance of turn-taking. And the worst thing you could do with an autistic 2-year-old is nothing. If you got a kid that doesn't talk, is doing a lot of weird behavior, worst thing you can do is nothing. So if you can't get any services, then you better get some students to come in, some special ed students, volunteers to come in and work with this kid. Somebody's got to work with this kid. You can't just let them sit and vegetate in the corner. The important thing is keeping them engaged for 20 hours a week or so. Can't emphasize that enough. And you know, the thing about autistic kids is you got to push them a little bit, because if you don't push them a little bit, they got to be slightly out of their comfort zone. If you don't stretch, they don't make progress. But then on the other hand, you can't just shove them into some sensory thing they can't handle. And no sudden surprises. No surprises. And when I was 15, I was afraid to go out to my aunt's ranch. And my mother gave me a choice, go for a week or all summer. But she wasn't going to let me not go. And once I got out there, I loved it. And I've talked to a number of parents where their kid was afraid to go to sleepaway camp or go on the Boy Scouts or something. Then once they got him in it, he loved it. You've always got to keep stretching. I'm seeing too many kids today, even on the high end of the spectrum, they aren't learning basic things. Basic things in the 50s that were taught to all kids, like how to shake hands, how to say please and thank you. You know, all kids were taught that. Boy, when we went over to the next door neighbor's house at the Culvers, she was more strict. One time I cut up all my meat. She says, no, you got to cut off each piece, you know, one at a time. You know, all kids were taught that. You know, we've got to be teaching these things. It was taught in the schools. One time I tried to eat my ice cream like a dog, and they just took it away, and they just said, you're not a dog. You know, you can't eat that way. Now, sensory problems, you can have it in conjunction with many, many different labels. Don't get hung up on these labels, because they're going to change them. And they're not accurate. It's a behavioral profile. The DSM is an odd combination of based on a little bit of science and insurance codes. It's basically what it is. And I'm going to be showing you a brain scanning technology that's going to eventually blow it all away. But the thing that horrifies me is people get locked into these labels. You know, is my kid PDD-NOS? Doesn't matter. they're going to get rid of that label and place it to not otherwise cataloged. Instead of not otherwise specified, not otherwise cataloged. Now, if that's rubbish, I don't know what it is. And then Asperger's becomes social communication disorder, and they say that's not autism. That's totally ridiculous, because social communication disorder is the core criteria for autism. But sensory issues can really cause problems, and they're very variable, and they vary from nuisances to being very debilitating. When I was a little kid, sounds hurt my ears. Okay, so what are some simple things you can do to maybe desensitize this? Let the kid initiate the sound. Or let the kid initiate, well, how much Walmart do I have to tolerate? Okay, if your kid throws a fit every time you go to Walmart, you've got really, really bad sensory issues. But let him control how much Walmart he has to take, and then give a signal and then go out. But sometimes you can desensitize by gradually pushing to tolerate a little bit more, but the child has got to control it. And then there's some where the sensory issues are so bad that they can't tolerate a normal office or a normal store. And boy, if there's one place we need to be finding some good treatments, it's for the sensory stuff. Auditory threshold, mine was normal. I was tested for epilepsy and deafness back in 1949. Even though your auditory threshold's normal, that tells you nothing about auditory detail. That's the ability to hear the hard consonant sounds. I cannot differentiate between cat, bat, rat, pat. I have to figure out those words by context. My speech teacher would slow down, give the brain a chance to process, slow down, present stuff a bit more slowly. Some kids' hearing fades in and out like a bad mobile phone. And all of these problems get worse when you get tired. Another problem when brains have developmental problems is attention shifting slowness. Just the other day, I had to do a talk, and they had this monitor down in front that was supposed to have my slides on it, which would be really nice, but it got disconnected, so it had a blue line that moved every 5 seconds. I could not do my talk with this blue line switching every 5 seconds. They had to turn that monitor around because it attracts my attention, and then it took me a long time to shift back. Now, this slide illustrates attention shifting slowness. If you put eye tracking stuff on people, the normal looks at the eyes. But look at how many times the normal line shifts back and forth. It shifts back and forth way more often than the autistic does. And the autistic or some other person with sensory processing problems is looking at the mouth because they're trying to lip read. They don't hear that well. They're not hearing auditory detail. Now, it's called different things. If you're in the dyslexia literature, it's called phonological awareness. If you're in the sensory literature, it's auditory processing disorder. It's the same thing. And eventually, this will all be diagnosed brain scanning equipment. I'll be showing you the new frontier on brain scanning equipment. Okay, another problem that some people have, I don't have this problem. See, the problem with sensory issues, they're so variable. One kid has visual problems. Another kid has auditory problems. Another kid has food problems. It's very variable. And some people get pixelation of the visual images, similar to what migraine sufferers get. You see, back here in the back of the head, you have circuits for shape, color, motion, and texture. And they have to work together to assemble a graphics file. Scientists know where the circuits are located, but they don't know how they work. Can you imagine if we took a flash drive and sent it back in a time machine 100 years from now? Do you think the best scientists in the world could figure out how a movie's stored on a flash drive? Well, no. That's about where we're at right now with the visual system. And the problem is in the back of the head. Now, what's a sign that there's something wrong with a kid's visual system? They do a lot of flicking like this. They do a lot of looking out the corner of their eye. The kid may be terrified of escalators. They hate fluorescent lights. 60-cycle fluorescent lights flicker. I had a student that had this problem. She wasn't autistic. She was dyslexic. Boy, did she have this problem. And the eye exam, a quick eye exam, may be normal. Ask a child that's having reading problems if he ever sees the print jiggle on the page. Now, this problem can vary from a nuisance that causes eye strain to so bad they can't read. I find 1 out of 50 in my livestock handling class where the students have to do a drawing of a cattle handling facility, and they have to draw circles and things. These kids cannot draw that have this problem. I can diagnose it, and they're screwed up drawings. And then I ask them the screening questions. Do you hate driving at night? Fluorescent lights bothering you? Escalators, do you ever see the print jiggle? Okay, here's simple things you can do. And now, things that I tend to favor are the things you can buy at Walmart. Because when I do a lot of free talks, I have people come in that are just dirt poor. So one of the things you can do is stuff from Walmart. And these are the interventions that I tend to give the most priority to. All right, you're stuck in a room with no windows. Put an incandescent lamp next to the kid's desk. The old-fashioned energy waster light bulb. Has to be the old-fashioned hot energy waster. Maybe you wear a hat. Now for computers, you want to use tablets and laptops. Tablets and laptops. They're the only computers that don't flicker. Everything else flickers and is terrible. Try printing the homework on different colored papers. Gray, lavender, light blue, tan. You know, and the student's got to pick out the color that works. Sometimes the Irwin lenses work, but they're too pricey for most people. So let's go down to Walmart and we'll try out some of the pink sunglasses, some of the light purples. So if you can go to the head shop in San Francisco, they've really got a lot of good Irwin lenses. Play around with the gel papers that they put on the lights in theater, that, you know, in your theater department somewhere. And the thing that's interesting, the color that works on the glasses is not the same color that works on the paper. And the person has to pick out what works for them. And you've got to get real pale ones. But I've had students that have come back after they've gone sunglass shopping. I had one girl come back and she got an A on her economics quiz because the slides stopped jiggling. Now, wouldn't it be stupid to flunk out of school because you didn't get some $15 sunglasses or do some colored paper or something like that? It's the kind of stuff I like. Really easy stuff for people to do. Okay, severe sensory problems on the lower end of the spectrum. Screening out. All the information is coming in, just bombarding them. They're going to need frequent breaks to calm down, get their mind back together. They may be monochannel. They can't see and hear at the same time. If you're working with older individuals that are nonverbal, I recommend these books. These are two nonverbal people with autism that type independently. No wrist support here. If they have wrist support, I don't read it. These type independently. How Can I Talk If My Lips Don't Move by Tito and Carly's Voice. And their descriptions of very severe sensory problems give you tremendous, tremendous insight. You work with sensory problems, you need to read these books because these people can tell you what it's like. And they talk about sensory systems not working together. Like Tito might see a blue door, he first sees a blue blob, that's the color circuit, and then he sees the outline of the door. You see the edge circuits and the shape circuits and the color circuits are working separately. Carly talks about information just flooding in like tidal waves and not being able to stand it. And then she once described that she was on 60 Minutes or some show like that, and she said, I don't know if I can stay still unless the cameraman's just cute enough so I can stay still. And sensory problems are real. There is papers that show this. And the thing I'm finding interesting on the research on sensory problems is about 60% of it is done outside the US. Israel, Europe, Australia, Canada. They seem to have a little more progressive view on these sorts of things, but it is real. And in the future, we'll have brain scanning to be able to diagnose this very, very precisely. Where you have an abnormality in autism is the inter-office communication circuits, the circuits that interconnect different parts of the brain. See, when you hear a word, you see a word, you think about a word, different parts of the brain turn on. And you've got to have inter-office communications. That's what the NIH calls the connectome. That's the connectome. And I got to make sure I understand how this timer works. It's a little too futuristic for me. Okay, this is a map of sort of the freeways of the most big, the great big freeways, just the freeways that connect up different parts of the brain. And it's sort of like, you know, on the East Coast, that's the frontal cortex. And we may have a lot of extra side streets on the frontal cortex, but we're missing a lot of the big freeways up and down the East Coast. We're missing some of the freeways going into Chicago where it says amygdala, that's the emotion center. And out in Silicon Valley, we may get some extra freeways and side streets built for doing all the fun math and graphic design stuff. You know, because a math card and a graphics card is more important than a social card. I mean, if you're a geek, that's what you're really into. Okay, that's my head there. Now that is the connectome my connectome. You see, in your brain, you got white matter and you got gray matter. Now you can see there's a space around the outside there. That's not filled with air. That's where the gray matter goes. And the whole rest of the brain is the connector circuits. And you can see the brain's made out of interconnector circuits. Now this is done on a Defense Department funded scanner at the University of Pittsburgh by Walter Snyder. And this was developed for head injuries in veterans. Now what happens, like in a soldier, for example, is you just rip these circuits. You just rip them in half. See, in a head injury, you rip up circuits. In a developmental disorder, they don't grow right. But you end up with a lot of the same problems. And this scanner can where these circuits cross. When they cross like that, do I have a bridge or do I have an intersection? It can tell the difference. You can virtually dissect out all the white matter circuits with this scanner. This goes beyond any other scanner. Right now, it's just one. But you know what? The Defense Department's been working with the manufacturer of the scanners so that when hospitals upgrade, they can put this upgrade into their scanners. Now, of course, the Defense Department's not going to pay for autism research. They'll pay for the hardware to put it out there in the field. And then researchers have got to learn how to use it in autism. And I was the very first person with autism to get in this scanner. It's always fun to play with the new toys. And then they compared my brain against some 64-year-old art professor from the University of Pittsburgh for my control. It was very interesting what we found. And there's my connectome without the rest of the head. Okay, now that is a circuit for your language circuit, a language output circuit. In other words, speak what I see. So I see a dog, I can say the word dog. That's a normal one right there. There's mine. Okay, now what happened there is it couldn't get to its destination. So it started growing all these weird sprouts, all these strange side streets. Now the thing is, let's look at bandwidth. That's showing bandwidth inside those circles. I had trouble with getting my speech out. I couldn't get my speech out. Well, this shows why. Then you have another kid that's echolalic. This would probably be normal in the echolalic kid. Now we're going to have to do research to show if that's true or not. But that's the hypothesis. And this part would be normal, but then some other part that connects meaning would not be right. You're going to be eventually able to really diagnose stuff. But you see, right now, we've got the new telescope. It's sort of like in scanning. We've gone from a toy telescope on the ground to the Hubble. That is how far this scanning technology is going to go. I mean, this machine is just amazing. And if your hospital upgrades to a 3 Tesla Simons scanner, for $200,000 extra, you can get the add-on. You know, it's like add-ons on cars. You can get this program in your Siemens 3 Tesla brand new, super fancy scanner. So eventually, as hospitals upgrade and they get rid of their 1.5 Teslas, they'll go to, they'll get this. Now people have to learn how to use the new telescope. We're at the stage right now. It's like when the microscope was first invented. Can you imagine all the things that people just went around and looked at? Ooh, let's look at the scum from under your fingernails. Let's look at that, see what we can see. Okay, then they looked at my auditory circuit and compared it to the 64-year-old art professor. And I've got a really little weeny, speak what I hear. Vision is definitely my dominant sense. I learn very poorly through my ears. But you know what? There's other students that learn best through their ears. And now what we don't know on these circuits, we go back and we look at this, we got a bandwidth problem. Now when you do therapy, there's no way you're going to grow these big long axons. There's no way. Those are interstate highways. But when you do therapy, do you widen the highways or do you build side streets out here around those end bushes? That's not known. I mean, this is where it's at. This is going to be like a totally new frontier. And I'm really happy that the Army, we got to thank DARPA, the advanced research arm of our Defense Department, for this. Because the NIH has a scanner, but it hasn't solved the intersection problem. Okay, there's evidence that visual thinking and mathematical thinking is covered up by language, because there's a type of Alzheimer's where artwork comes out after your language part of the brain is wrecked. I can't emphasize enough, build on the kid's strengths. I can't emphasize that enough. When I was a little kid, my art ability was always encouraged, always expanded. If the kid likes trains, let's read about trains. Let's do math with trains. tap in to the motivation of that fixation. And we got to be thinking a lot more when kids are young. What are they going to do when they grow up? We're not doing enough of that sort of thing. When I was in middle school, when I was 13, I had a sewing job my mother got for me. When I was 15, I was out at my aunt's ranch building the gates and all the projects that were shown in the movie. I was doing carpentry work. I was cleaning horse stalls. And then when I was in college, I did an internship at a research lab, and I had to live in a rented house with another lady. You know, these were things that were set up. You know, I had lots and lots of work skills before I ever graduated from college. And I'm seeing kids a lot less severe than I was, and they're going nowhere because they haven't had these skills pounded into them. They haven't done things like paper routes and stuff like that. Okay. My mind works like Google for images. You know, the movie shows it exactly. You know, but not everybody on the spectrum thinks the way I do. You see, in autism and in a lot of different labels, lots of different labels, you tend to have uneven skills. Good at one thing, bad at something else. Now, being a photorealistic visual thinker, that's been very, very helpful in my work designing cattle handling facilities. It's just, I can visualize it in my mind. I used to think everybody could visualize things in their mind. Well, you better need to have a visualizer like me, you know, on some design teams, because I would have never have made the mistake that caused the Japanese nuclear power plants to blow up. Well, it's not too smart when you live next to the sea to put your really important emergency generators for your emergency cooling pumps in the basement and you don't have waterproof doors. Well, diesels don't run underwater. And that is why 4 nuclear reactors melted down. That's pretty bad. That's a design mistake I would never make. And there's the dip vat that they had for the movie. Boy, the geek side of me loved the fact that in the movie all my projects were accurate. And there are my drawings. You see, when you're a weird geek, how did I sell jobs? I sold jobs by showing off my portfolio. They didn't want to talk to me, but I'd whip out one of my drawings. I hope this projector's doing it. It's so-so. I can't really see it that well. Looks great on the computer. But people didn't want to talk to me, but then when I showed them my drawings, I got respect. And the other thing is, you never know who's going to get you in the back door. You always want to have your portfolio with you. Now you can put it on your phone. So that no matter where you go, you've got your portfolio. And I got very clever about finding the back door. And when I started my design business, it was selling one little job at a time. One little tiny corral system, then I built that up, and I built my business up very gradual. This is not something that happened overnight. And there's another one of my drawings. Now, how do you form a concept when I have all these individual specific pictures floating around in my mind? This little boy drew this picture to show how the concepts, the pictures, are put into categories. You sort individual pictures into boxes in your head, and that is how you know. Okay, I realized my thinking was different when I asked other people about church steeples. You see, I was shocked to find out that most people just see this vague generalized thing. I only see specific ones. There is no vague generalized steeple. You see, this image comes out of the association cortex of the brain. I'm probably accessing the primary files. My pictures come up like Google for images. And I used to say my mind works for Google. And another thing that was found in this scanner is I have extra association fibers back here. Most people have them up here in the frontal cortex. I have them here. Great big extra fibers going back into the memory banks. So my thinking's bottom up, not top down. Everything is learned by specific example. Okay, there are some of the churches. Well, and I can put them in different categories. Cathedrals, chapels, local ones. This is why it's so important to get kids out doing a lot of stuff, exposing them to a lot of stuff. Because you got to fill the internet of their mind up with a lot of information. I'm seeing too many of these kids are way too sheltered. You always got to stretch past their comfort zone. And I'm not seeing that today. Last night I couldn't sleep, and a publisher sent me a book. It was on animal thinking. And there's a galley proof for a book, and I was looking at this book last night, and I was paging through it, looking at the dog section, and I found an interesting thing about dogs. And that dogs that live in the house can't solve problems, like how to get a bowl of food out from under a fence. Dogs that have lived outside, they pull a string and they get the food out. The indoor dog is there looking to mama to help them get it out. Well, I think we're getting some of that with some of these guys. I'm seeing they're too coddled. The mother was always getting me to do new things. She didn't just shove me into it, but always stretching me, like going out and getting a little sewing job, getting me in different things. When I was like 6, I had to put on my little church dress and serve hors d'oeuvres to my mother's guests and say, "How do you do?" And she made the other kids do it too. These are the kinds of things that were taught in the 50s. Now, I used to joke around that I had a huge internet trunk line going deep into my brain. Now, this is old scanning. This is old DTI. It sort of just can see big bundles, but it can't tell where the intersections are. And it can show that I got something bigger than somebody else has. I can't wait until we can do these over again on the new equipment and see what we've got. But I do have a huge, big one going all the way back to primary visual cortex. Now, you see that big bush up in the front? Now, I just had lunch with Walter yesterday, and we were talking about that maybe when I learn language, that shunt circuits, in other words, side streets were grown about right where that bush is at. That when you do the therapy, little side streets get built to join things back up. But, we just don't know, because this is the era of the new microscopes just been invented, and right now, as far as autism goes, you got to just go around and look at stuff before you can even design a study. Okay, this is conventional scanning. It shows that I've got a real asymmetry in the ventricles, and the fluid kind of goes back into the trash working memory and some of my math stuff. I have absolutely horrible working memory. I cannot sequence. I've got to write down a sequence, or I can't remember it. Now, this is an important slide. Some people are photorealistic visual thinkers like me. And the kinds of jobs we're going to be good at is industrial design, graphics, art, photography. It's realistic visual thinking. You see, Steve Jobs was probably on the spectrum. He's dead, so I can say he's on the spectrum. I'm not going to name the live Aspies. And you see, he was an artist. Look his patents up on the internet. They're not engineering, they're design. He was an artist. And then the engineers, another kind of mind, have to make the phone guts and make the thing work. I absolutely couldn't do algebra. And the mistake made in my math education is I didn't jump to geometry. Kids that can't do algebra, jump to geometry and trig. Just do it. There's all kinds of free math lessons online. There's so much free math and tech stuff online you can do. Another kind of mind is the pattern thinker. This is the mathematician. This is the computer programming mind, the engineering mind, the math mind, the music mind. These are people that are good at all kinds of engineering and computer science jobs. And if you want to get a career in computer science right now, I'll tell you it's hot. Electrical engineering combined with computer science. You want to be hot? That's what you take. Now let's look at some of the other jobs that are really hot, that are good for visual thinkers and pattern thinkers. Top master diesel mechanic, top master auto mechanic, certified welder. There's going to be plenty of jobs for that. And machinists that can do computer-aided machine tools. Those are all 2-year community college degrees. And they're fantastic jobs, and they're not going to be outsourced. And the kids that like to do things with their hands are going to like these jobs. Now, one of my big concerns today is they've taken all the hands-on classes out of the schools. Terrible, terrible. They teach practical problem-solving skills. Kids get self-esteem because they can do these things, and they can do these things well. I'm really concerned about this. I think we're doing people a great disservice. And the auto dealerships right now don't know what they're going to do when the mechanics all retire. Heating and air conditioning. Electrician. I was just down in Texas, and boy, they get 10 electricians out of the community college, and they're hired like that. You're not going to fix people's wiring from China or cars from China. There's going to be tons of jobs in the medical field. Nurse in a busy hospital probably wouldn't be a very good job. But nurse in a quiet place with old people might be a good job. How about fixing all this fancy medical equipment? People have to repair it. That would be good for people on the spectrum. And where are all the old Aspies? They're all employed. Work with them all the time. These meatpacking plants I work with, they'd fall down if you didn't have these people. They're employed. And the reason why they got employed is they pounded in the social skills. They did all these hands-on things as kids, playing around with old cars and stuff like that. And they got into jobs where they could use their skills. Then you have a third type. This is the word aspie. This is the guy that likes history, creative writing. They do writing stuff. They're not good at drawing, and they're not good at math. They're writers. This is the group that doesn't have a fancy portfolio to show off. The mathematicians and the pattern and the visual thinkers like me, we can show off our computer programming, we can show off our art and stuff like that. Boy, I can tell you, I tried computer programming. Ugh, I just looked at some of the beginning lessons just the other day on a free program. I'm going, oh man, ugh. And there's fantastic free stuff on the internet. Free classes at Stanford, free classes at MIT. Just type that into Google. Code Academy, Udacity. These are free programs where you can take free classes in computer programming. Wolfram Mathematica, a fantastic site. There's so much great free stuff. You name a program, Java applets or something like that, you type that in. There's free stuff that teach you how to do this stuff. There's so much great stuff on the internet. There's a lot of garbage on the internet too, but a lot of great stuff. And then some people are mixtures of these thinking types. But we need to be thinking about, when kids get like 8 or 9 years old, what are they going to do when they grow up? And the problem we've got in autism is that a lot of educators know how to work with the more severe kids, but they don't know what to do with a smart aspie. Then he gets labeled social communication disorder, or God forbid, oppositional defiant, or conduct disorder, or temper dysregulation disorder. I'm worried about all the drugs these kids are getting on. Now, I take medication, and us visual thinkers tend to be very anxious. Some of the mathematicians are anxious. The word thinkers tend to be calmer. And my anxiety and my panic attacks got worse and worse and worse as I got older. And if I hadn't gone on antidepressants in a really low dose, I wouldn't be here now. And in my book, Thinking in Pictures, I describe my experiences, and it's called A Believer in Biochemistry. And there's others that don't need medication. It's sort of like, but I wouldn't be here because my fear system was going full blast, and my fear center in my brain is 3 times larger than normal. And that was determined with regular scanning equipment. Okay, just to show you there's different kinds of math. You can do algebra the verbal way or do it the geometric way. Now, why would algebra be the prerequisite for geometry when geometry was invented first? And I call that the inconvenient fact. No, go ahead, jump them to geometry. Now, when you tend to see these abilities is 3rd or 4th grade. You don't usually see it in 3-year-olds, but 3rd or 4th grade, 8, 9-year-olds. And you'll get the uneven skills. The little mathematicians, they'll need help in reading. But if that kid needs to be 5 grades ahead in math, let them be 5 grades ahead in math. And there's some political correct BS that's going on in some of the schools now, where they'll say, well, 2nd graders can only read 2nd grade books in the library. That's BS. Where everybody has to be the same. If this 3rd grader needs a 6th grade math book, he needs to have a 6th grade math book. But he may need to have some special ed in reading. That tends to be the pattern. The mathematicians have trouble with reading, and the visual thinkers like me have trouble with with mathematics. And there's actual 10-year-old brain scan evidence that I finally dug up in the literature. Couldn't sleep one night, was looking at a real boring paper, and I looked at one of his references, and I looked at his cited by, and I found this fantastic paper that actually verified my different kinds of thinking between the photorealistic and the more mathematical. Just to give you a glimpse into the pattern thinking mind, this is not my mind. That praying mantis is made out of a single sheet of folded paper. No cuts, no tape. And what you see in the background is the folding pattern. That's not my mind. You see, there's 2 kinds of visual thinking. The more pattern, visual spatial, and then the object or photorealistic. And there's science that shows this. And I'm going to be working on another book right now called The Autistic Brain, and all this research is going to be reviewed in that. This is based in science. Okay, hands-on stuff. Oh man, that's what saved me. If I hadn't had the hands-on classes, think about it. Kids don't learn sewing anymore, cooking. They're not learning woodworking. I mean, these teach problem-solving skills. You can teach mathematics with all of these different kinds of things. How do I handle abstract thought, like the power and the glory in the Lord's Prayer? Well, it's a rainbow, and at the base of the rainbow there's an electrical tower. That's the power and the glory. This is really important. Everything I learn is by specific example. It's bottom up, not top down. Everything is learned with specific examples. So how do we teach something like manners? You got to use your teachable moments. Okay, let's say I'm twirling my fork around like this. Mother doesn't scream no, she'd say put it back down on your plate. If I reached across to get the salt and pepper, she would say ask your sister to pass it. She would give the instruction. If I ran behind the counter at the store, she'd say only the clerks can go behind the counter. She would give the instruction, always using that teachable moment. And that is how all kids in the 50s were taught. You see, a lot of the problems we're having today with the mild Asperger's is because they don't have a 50s upbringing. See, I'm serious. I am serious. Why don't you play games with categorizing? Because then you've got to learn that these objects can be in different categories. They could be in the rectangular category. They could be in the red category. They could be in the plastic-containing category. Teach, flexible thinking, playing games with categories. The autistic mind's into the details. They'll pick out those little letters a lot quicker than they're going to pick out the big letter that's made out of little letters. Now, when I was in high school, I was just teased and teased and teased and teased, and I was called tape recorder. And I couldn't figure out why I was called tape recorder. And I was called that because I always use the same phrases. But then, as I get out and I do more and more things, and you fill up my mind with more and more stuff, then my thinking gets less and less like a tape recorder. Because now the Google that I'm equipped with now has more stuff to search. Another thing we have to look at on all this brain stuff is, when does Einstein become Asperger's? And Einstein probably was on the spectrum. There's no black and white dividing line between geeks, nerds, and mild autism. You see, there's a point where it's normal variation. It's just normal variation. And as they dig into the genome and they find out how the gene's operating system works, only about 3 to 5% of your genome is coding DNA. And the rest of it is what they used to call junk DNA in the 80s. I never believed that. Never believed in junk DNA. Because they found out now that that's that gene's operating system. That's what tells the coding DNA what to do. And you can get all these little tiny glitches and things like that that change stuff. And there's a point where it's just going to be normal variation. And then, of course, you get things that are totally pathological. But teach number concept. Count different objects. The kid's got to learn you can have 2 people, 2 cups, 2 paper clips, 2 houses, 2 cars, 2 marbles. It applies to lots of different things. Teach adding and subtracting with different objects. Use cooking to teach proportionality, and measuring. We're going to take this recipe and we're going to do 2/3, not half. Let's do 2/3. Let's make it a little more harder. Teach fractions by cutting up fruit, cutting up the pizza, using your teachable moments to make those mathematical concepts real. You've got to teach words, position words with many different examples, because remember, it's bottom-up thinking. You go down the stairs. You go up the stairs. A plane goes down and lands. A plane flies up in the air. You put a cup down. You lift a cup up. You lie down on the bed. You get up from the bed. Do different examples. Otherwise, they might think down just applies to going down the stairs. Everything is learned by specific example. It's detailed to general, not top-down. Well, what's happening in politics today? Well, they just attack each other, and then they get a big theory, and they try to cram all the data into it, and you're getting people in government now that never done any hands-on things, so everything's turning into vague abstractions. The normal mind leaves out the details, and I find this when I'm trying to troubleshoot behavior. They'll say, my kid has a behavior problem in the classroom. Tell me the most important thing about autism. Well, if it's a 2-year-old, I'm going to say early intervention. I have a standard thing I say for that. But once they get past that stage, I got to know age, does he talk, what did he do? I can't just tell you what the best thing to do for a behavior problem in the classroom is. I got to find out what he's doing. The normal mind overgeneralizes, and there's research that shows that. Now, another more conventional functional MRI showed that I was more interested in looking at things than looking at pictures of people. But if you didn't have Tesla, who liked things very much, you wouldn't have had the power plant to give you lights in this classroom. I mean, in this hotel. This is not, I think a brain can either be made to be more thinking or made to be more social. We need to have a certain amount of variety. Because who do you think made the first stone spear? It wasn't the social yakety-yaks, that's for sure. I got social interaction through shared interests. Horseback riding, model rocket club, electronics. Get kids into things like scouting, FFA, 4-H. I know a number of kids on the spectrum that are doing a 4-H project, a lamb, a rabbit, or poultry, where they can do things with other kids where there's a shared interest. Get them in the music club, school band, the play, all of these sorts of activities. Get them involved in these things. And some parents are too hesitant to do this. I had a parent call me up, and her 12-year-old wanted to go into 4-H rabbits. And she was afraid to sign her up. I said, sign her up right now, and you're going to have rabbits in your backyard, and just get over it. Because that's something that she wants to do. You got to get them doing things. How about all kinds of classes that interest them? Look at the community colleges. There's all kinds of career classes in community colleges. But you want to make sure you study stuff that is going to have jobs. And I can't emphasize this enough about teaching job skills. When we have a behavior problem, you got to be able to categorize it. Is it biology, like sensory problems, or maybe a hidden painful medical problem like acid reflux, or allergies, or yeast infection, or something like that? Or is it just behavior? Frustrated because they can't communicate, or they want to get attention or get out of doing something. Well, you see, that's categorization. See, when I troubleshoot, I immediately want to categorize things. I find most people don't want to do that. I find it's very easy to categorize it. Is it biology? I'm appalled at the amount of individuals that have a medical problem, a regular, treatable medical problem. And the doctors hear autism, and, okay, so allergies are autism, or maybe you got acid reflux. Well, you treat the acid reflux then. I talked to one mom, a little bit of Prevacid just worked wonders. You can buy that in the drugstore. That's something you can get at Walmart. Okay, here are sensory and neurological problems that may need some accommodations. Like there's some kids that can't tolerate the real noisy classroom or the supermarket. I can't tolerate scratchy clothes. I got to wear soft things underneath. And some cotton itches, other cotton doesn't. Some kids are terrible at handwriting. Let them type. Fluorescent lights, that's the biggest #1 problem in the classrooms. But where everybody with a developmental problem has difficulty is multitasking. A receptionist in a busy office trying to type and do phone calls at the same time would be bad. Also, I cannot remember long strings of verbal information. Like when I had a job in milking cows, we had 10 steps for setting up the milking machines and the milk tank. If that hadn't been on a cheat sheet on the wall, the 10 steps listed on plastic card, I would have been in trouble. And if they hadn't had that, I would have needed to write it down and make my own little card to have in my pocket. Because now eventually, after I'd done it enough, I didn't have to look at the cheat sheet. But I don't remember long strings of verbal information. It's a real problem. 50s upbringing, turn-taking in conversation and activities. That was taught to all kids. Board games, everything that was fun that you did in the 50s, you had to take turns with another kid. Being on time. I'm seeing too many people they can't get up on time. Well, that was a non-issue. Man, I was taught that. Then you had to sometimes do some activities with the family you didn't really want to do. When I was talking to a family who wanted to go to Disneyland, and there was the problem of their autistic kids' sensory issues. I said, let's figure out how to make it work. I told them about noise-canceling headphones. They didn't even know what they were. And I explained how to get the travel kind where the muffs will lay flat and you can put them in this little case, sell them at the airport, but you need to get them used to that. But then on the other hand, if you wear earplugs or headphones, they have to be off for half the day. Because if you wear them all the time, your ear's going to get more sensitive. Now, okay, Disneyland, you can wear them all day, because that's special. But on regular days, they have to be off for half the day because you want to try to desensitize. But it's okay to wear them in the cafeteria or to wear them in the noisy, Walmart or someplace like that. Learning how to do things that pleased other people. Saying please and thank you. If I forgot to say thank you, Mother would say, you forgot to say thank you. When I was 7 and 8 years old, we could go into nice restaurants. I knew how to order. And then when I went out with other people, she even taught me how to look at the prices and not to order more expensive things than what the host ordered. These things were taught real early on. And when I made a social mistake, they didn't scream no. What they did is give the direction. Let's say I stuck my tongue out in church. They'd say, put it back in your mouth. It's rude to stick your tongue out in church. They'd give the direction. Or I pointed it at somebody that was fat and go, ha, 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 look at that. Hill to the hippo at the supermarket. Mother would say, it's rude to point at people. She'd give me instruction on what to do. You need to use all those teachable moments. That was done with all kids in the 50s. We had to learn Emily Post, etiquette. That was taught. How do you set your knife and fork? All that stuff was taught. Not chewing with your mouth open. It was just taught. And the school taught it too. Everybody taught it to kids. Being rude. Okay, being rude, that's kind of abstract. What does being rude mean? Well, an example of being rude would be, sticking my tongue out in church, telling somebody they're fat, pushing in line at the movie theater. Again, learned by specific example. The other big thing is consistent discipline between home and school. The rule was tantrum at school was no TV for one night. The school would call Mother, I'd have no TV for one night. I'm seeing less and less of parents and schools working together. I just talked to an older therapist just the other day about that, and she was getting really, really frustrated with that because she's been in the field for 40 years. And there's they just think, well, the school can just fix it. No, they've got to work together. You can't have the kid playing the school against the mom and vice versa. They've got to work together. Being a slob. Being eccentric's okay, but you can't be a slob. Okay, shaking hands. I am appalled at the number of people that come up to me at the book table and they haven't learned how to shake hands. Nobody's demonstrated to them how much force do you use. They try to shake hands, but they haven't been taught. They either rip your hand off or they give you a dead fish. You've got to just demonstrate to them. Eye contact. I learned this serving hors d'oeuvres at my mother's dinner parties. Shopping. At a very young age, I could shop. I'm seeing kids that have graduated from college, they haven't learned how to shop. These things were just taught, to everybody. Also, kids are not doing play groups where 4 kids get together and they got to decide how they're going to build that sandcastle or decide how they're going to play a game. And you can't always get your way. A lot of kids on the spectrum are really bad about turn taking and always wanting their way. And they've got to learn they can't get their way. Well, these informal play groups, we had tons of them when we were kids. That teaches those kind of negotiation skills. And when you grow up, it's called work groups. It's the same thing. Eccentric's okay, dirty and rude is not. You can't make me into something I'm not. The other thing is, how did I deal with anger issues? I got kicked out of 9th grade for throwing a book. Then when I went away the girl teased me. Then when I went away to a special school for kids with problems, I got in some serious fist fights, and they took horseback riding away for 2 weeks. And I switched from anger to crying. There's problems with top-down control and emotion. So what you do is switch. You know what NASA space scientists do when the shuttle was canceled? They cry. Seen it. There's a 60 Minutes episode you can look up. I went to a career fair right near Huntsville, Alabama, which is a big NASA center, and there was an old NASA space scientist my age, and he gave a talk about careers in aerospace, showing all these beautiful pictures of the shuttle, and the shuttle had been canceled, and he was crying in front of 500 high school students at a career fair. Because if he'd been throwing things, he wouldn't have been a NASA space scientist. Now, how did I manage to switch from anger to crying? I don't know, it just happened. But don't be upset if your teenage boy cries. Be happy, because then you don't have to take medication and stuff for anger management issues. And when I worked at the meatpacking plants, I used to go hide in the electrical room, hide in the cattle catwalk. Electrical rooms are great. Yeah, I was just out at a hotel the other day, and the door to the electrical room was open, and I had to go in and commune with the electrical room because, well, that's where I'd go. I didn't go in the restrooms. I didn't want people to see me. I'd go underneath the basement stairs where no one would know where I'm at. But I wouldn't have had a career if I hadn't switched from anger to crying. Was I still miserable when I was teased and bullied? Yes. And the only places where I was not teased and bullied were the special interest things. The kids interested in electronics and rockets, things like that, were not the kids that teased. Okay, how are we doing on time? I think a little bit more time before we'll do the interview. I like to categorize things. So I've taken all of society's rules and I've put them into categories. You can't have really bad things going on in the world, like killing people and things like that and blowing up hotels. You have your courtesy rules, important category. Then you have illegal but not bad. This is where you figure out how to get in these back doors. This is where you skip the algebra requirement and you jump them to geometry. The heck with the stupid school rules. Okay, we got to show a kid that's a video game addict that oil rigs have joysticks too. So we know somebody that works on an oil rig, and we're going to go out there on a Sunday when none of the suits are around. We're going to show them the joystick on an oil rig. Is that 13-year-old supposed to be on an oil rig? No, but you're going to be super careful. You're going to keep them away from the drill. You're going to make sure that nothing happens. Because the thing is, if you don't show kids interesting stuff, they're not going to get interested. You've got to get them out and show them all kinds of interesting things. Like Wired magazine, that's a great magazine to get. Business Week, oh, I love that magazine. Read about all the undiagnosed Asperger's people in there. Then you have the sins of the system. Boy, since September 11th, if it's at the airport, you better behave yourself because anything there is going to get you in a pile of trouble. That's sins of the system. Boy, you don't touch that stuff. In one state, pot's legal. In another state, it's 10 years in the slammer. You better know where your sins of the system are. Now, here are some examples of hidden, painful medical problems. Heartburn, big number one. Constipation. They got urinary tract infections, yeast infections, ear infections. A tooth, a root canal gone bad. You got to rule this stuff out. It's appalling. Hidden, painful medical problems that people have. And there's my squeezing machine. And when I got into puberty, the anxiety attacks started. Because us visual thinkers, both autistic and non-autistic, we tend to be anxious. And as I went through my 20s, it got worse and worse and worse. I was falling apart with colitis, headaches. I went on a little tiny dose of an old drug called disipramine, and it cured the headaches and the colitis. It went away. Just cured it. And it was a very tiny dose, because the mistake that's made with drugs like Prozac and Zoloft is giving too high a dose. It's a little tiny dose. You take too much, you're going to get agitation and insomnia. You guys got to take a little dose, and I explain that in the Believer in Biochemistry chapter in Thinking in Pictures. Another thing, get lots of exercise. I do 100 sit-ups every night, and if I don't do them, I can't sleep. Maybe take some omega-3 supplements. We're omega-3 deficient in this country. I'm taking a lot of extra heavy-duty B vitamins. Yep, I buy those I get at Whole Foods. I get a certain thrill out of figuring out how to do this stuff with just ordinary cheap things that I can buy, because I've worked in construction for 25 years. Some of my best friends live in the trailer park. And you know what happens when I go out and I do a free talk? We fill up the basketball stadium. Because, I'm serious, because more than half the people can't afford the $150 registration fee. That's one thing I've learned since the movie came out. I've been doing a lot of free things at universities or really cheap conferences where it's $10. And we have to move it to the gymnasium or to the largest theater on the campus. And the reason for that is all the low-income folks are coming. So I like to figure out ways to do stuff that aren't really expensive. And obviously, people aren't going to be able to go and use this fancy new scanner. But the thing that can be learned would be if the things that you see in the scanner, you relate back to clinical symptoms. Because one thing that's happened with every brain scan experiment I have been in, it is validated something that showed up clinically. Okay, I'm high fear, my amygdala is bigger. Math is terrible, I got water in my math department. They found big, huge visual tracts for visual thinking. They found my language output circuits messed up. My cerebellum's undersized, that's why I have a balance problem. You know, it's backed up what showed up clinically. I always tell my students, you start at the brain first, and then you'll understand animal behavior. And my fear center, 3 times larger than normal. And that was done with an old-fashioned MRI machine. But you have to have a drawing program on there to trace the amygdala and calculate the area. Okay. You know, and as I got older, that anxiety got worse and worse and worse and worse. If I hadn't gone on the antidepressants, and I know other visual thinkers and graphic designers that, well, I can tell you, meat plants, they're held together with Prozac. Some of the best Hollywood directors, a little bit of Prozac. Just a little bit. Or they'd be on drugs and alcohol. Us visual thinkers, we got, you know, a lot of fear problems. Okay, there's a therapist working with some sensory integration. And the problem is, we've got people putting papers out and meta-analysis out saying this doesn't work. You see, the problem is, it only works on a subgroup. We've got to start subgrouping things by the particular sensory problem that they have. Because there's a subgroup where things like the weighted vests work. Just like with the diets, there's a subgroup where they work. Now, the omega-3s, they're getting good evidence now that they are good for the brain. There's getting to be a lot of papers on that now. There's swinging. Try swinging. And there's a number of kids that did their first words on a horse because you got rhythm and balancing. You know, I don't know what's going on with the vestibular system here. And the problem is there's a lot of theory, and a lot of it's rubbish. And that is one of the reasons why a lot of things get discredited. I'd rather just say there's a certain subgroup where these things work. We don't know how they work. Why do Irwin lenses? Why do colored glasses make the print stop jiggling? Well, it has to have something to do with these circuits in the back of the brain. You know what? It's called, we don't know how those circuits work. We know where they're located, because when you break them, it does very, very weird things to you. Like you go to pour stop-motion coffee like this if you break the motion circuit. But we don't know how it works. You know, it'd be like trying to figure out how a computer worked, you know, sent back in a time machine 100 years. How's a flash drive store stuff? Maybe a CD, we'd figure out it had pits and some kind of code. We'd probably get that figured out because they had good microscopes back then. But how a flash drive works, mystery. And there's a kid with a little weighted vest, and it helps some kids but not others. And the mistake that's made is leaving them on too long. But we need to figure out what subgroups these things work. And for some reason in this country, we seem to have an aversion to doing the really good research. Because I've just been, for this new book, I've just been surfing the web and just sort of get a big pile of abstracts printed out, and I go, okay, no. Then I put down US, write the name of the country it came from. And they're running 60 or 70% not in the US, especially the really good studies, is what I'm finding. I think it's important to get little kids desensitized so that they'll like touch. Now, this thing has just turned red, so maybe I'm supposed to be doing the interview now. Is it time to stop? What? I'll wind down. Okay. All right, let's just wind down with this slide on employment. Teenagers need to be doing jobs outside the home, period. When I was 13, I did a little sewing job, hand sewing job. I was cleaning horse stalls when I was 15. How about shoveling sidewalks for other people, mowing lawns for other people? I had a great science teacher, great science teacher who got me interested in science. Take them out to interesting places. There's how I fixed up our Skeeto house. I was building lots of things. You got to do it how other people would like it. Let's end on this slide for jobs for middle school kids. If there's a paper route around, get them on it. Otherwise, how about walking dogs for other people? The new paper route. How about fixing computers? How about mowing lawns, shoveling sidewalks for other people, making PowerPoint presentations, selling artwork and crafts, working on a church website? No, 12-year-old can do that, and they got to do the schedule every week, and they can't put dinosaurs on it or something stupid. Work on a neighborhood thing. Work in a farmer's market. We've got to start teaching these work skills. I'm seeing too many kids graduating from college, and they haven't learned one work skill. Okay, I'm going to end on that, and now we'll do the interview. Are we going to sit up here? Oh, my battery is dying.
So everyone can hear us? Temple, can you just test your mic since we just
Okay, you
replaced?
hear me okay? Okay.
Great. So this is our chance to get to know Temple a little bit better. We're going to ask some silly questions.
Okay.
I know you have a sense of humor, so I know you'll be okay with it. I was wondering maybe what your favorite color was. We never hear you talk about little things like that.
Oh, I've always liked red.
Red?
Yeah.
You're wearing kind of a red
Okay.
shirt. And last night when we were at dinner, I know that you zoomed in on the chocolate cake. What's your favorite dessert?
Oh, dark chocolate with some raspberry stuff on top, and boy, that did the cheesecake I could pass up, but that was killer chocolate cake, but it didn't have very much. But boy, that was good chocolate cake last night.
It was pretty good.
Yeah.
Temple was the first to go get it, and Larry Kaplan's wife and myself looked at it and said, "So how is it?"
It was very good.
Ditto. Okay, I wanted to ask you a little bit. You know, my daughter drives, and I know a lot of parents sometimes find that surprising that a person with autism might drive. And I was wondering, do you drive?
Yes, I do. And the way I learned was out of my aunt's ranch. My aunt taught me to drive. She also made me learn how to type. And we had to drive 3 miles every day up to the mailbox, and the truck was 3 on the column with a very balky clutch. That was not an easy truck. She let me just steer first, and then we switched over to do the clutch. You've got to just drive. The way to deal with a multitasking problem is you've got to totally learn the operation of the vehicle before you hit traffic. You've got to get the operation of the car on autopilot. You know, so if you're in some other place, well, get out in the big parking lot on a weekend and just spend 3 hours driving in that parking lot. Put up cones, put up boxes, steering, braking, backing up. Year on easy roads before you do difficult roads, like traffic and the freeways and things like that. But the best thing to do is find some big open field on private property somewhere where the kid can just go out and drive the car around the field and do it for like 5 hours at a time. And just got to learn how to operate that vehicle to where he doesn't have to think about it. You see, when you learn a motor task, the frontal cortex has to think about it. Well, you want to get to where the frontal cortex no longer has to think about it, and it goes on autopilot in the motor cortex. There's actually research that shows that that's how learning a motor skill works. And so they're going to need to just spend hours driving that car in a totally safe place, learning the operation of the car, parking, backing up. And I think parking lots, open fields, get it on private property somewhere, and you just drive and drive and drive and drive. And then you carefully, then of course somebody has to be with them. You go on a public road, somebody's got to be with them. But they need lots of hours of just practice. And I had that on dirt roads. And my aunt was with me because every day we had to drive 3 miles out to the mailbox and 3 miles back. And I did that for the entire summer.
I don't know about you all, but I also learned on dirt roads. I think that's just good advice for anyone. All right, I've heard you in other talks talk about some of your sensory issues. Like, I know that you wear jeans a lot and you don't wear dresses. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of your sensory stuff?
I can't stand my bare legs touching each other. I just can't stand the feeling of it. I hate dresses, always have hated them, and because I don't like my legs touching each other. And when I did have to wear dresses in high school, I always wore tights. Now, I notice now there's a lot of nice little soft kind of tights things that a lot of ladies wear. I would have been fine with those. Okay, you want a skirt? Okay, I'll wear a skirt, but I'm going to have those little tights on. And they've got a lot of things now that are softer and nicer. And it's easier now than it was with the clothes we had when I was young. Also, I found this, all cottons are not the same. Some cottons scratch and itch, even though it's 100% cotton. Other cottons don't scratch and itch. I'm amazed I get 100% a lot of cotton t-shirts. People give me t-shirts. And some I wear, and some I can't wear. They itch. I don't know why. There's something with the weave or with the type of cotton.
Do you have, I know some people use like organic cottons. Have you ever tried that?
That's not the issue.
That's not the issue?
I don't think that's the issue, because actually one of the worst t-shirts I ever had was an organic one with some kind of organic dye, and I broke out wearing that t-shirt.
Oh,
It
goodness.
was a really, really neat T-shirt, and I had to get rid of it. I couldn't wear that T-shirt. No, organic has nothing to do with it. It has to do with it has to do with the softness and the weave. Also, all clothing I wear against my skin, I wash before I wear it, because otherwise I'll break out in a rash. If I put a new bra on, I still wear my bras inside out, and they're turning into rags, and I'm just dreading when I have to buy new ones.
So I'm not going to ask about underwear.
What's it to do with underwear?
Gosh, that took me by surprise. Sorry. You got me. I wanted to go into a little bit about DSM-5. You were talking about subgroups and diets and so on. And sometimes when I think of phenotyping and DSM-5, I think about where phenotyping is going to take us and where we might lose that with DSM-5 and lose some of our research trends. What are your opinions on DSM-5?
I think you've got a situation here where you've got some disorders, or you've got a really odd mixture here, based in science and based in politics and insurance codes. And I'm trained as a hardcore biological scientist. I'm an animal scientist by training. When I did my PhD, I worked in neuroscience. Things like autism is a real thing, but it's the core criteria. The thing that's stupid about it is the social communication disorder is the core criteria. And they're going to say, and it says in the DSM-5 it's not autism. That doesn't even make any sense. You see, that's politics here. That's funding issues here talking. The other thing is, what does this do to wreck all the other research that we've done? You see, I think eventually, and what really makes me so excited about this new scanning tool is you'll be able to go in and you can actually dissect out the connector circuits. And the connectome, they're going to find out that's what makes the brain work, and find differences in connector circuits. And that'll be able to be diagnosed very precisely. Because they can say, okay, the bandwidth of my language output circuit is this. It's it only has 10% of what it's supposed to have. You actually can get a diagnosis that's precise, like a diagnosis for tuberculosis. The other thing I think we're going to find as you start working with that is there's going to be a lot of variation. When is something called pathology? One thing I learned working in the slaughterhouse is you can open up a cow that looks just fine walking around in the yards. There's all kinds of stuff wrong with it inside, and the cow's walking around out in the yards like just fine. This has been found with MRIs on backs, that people can be walking around with all kinds of back pathology and they're all right. A lot of that stuff gets overdiagnosed. When do things just become normal variation? And then we got to learn how the operating system for the genome works. It's not junk DNA. They call it non-coding DNA. I'd rather call it the gene's operating system, because that's what it is.
So I don't know, we kind of jumped ahead. How many of you are familiar with DSM-5 and the changes coming up? So some of you are. It's the diagnostic manual, statistical manual.
Well, you see, the problem you got with that is you got
Is
doctors,
they're updating it,
you got
and they're
doctors
changing
sitting
it for
around
autism.
a conference room table arguing over diagnoses. Nobody sits around a conference room table in a hotel discussing changing a tuberculosis diagnosis. You either got tuberculosis or you don't. You look at the very basic things like depression, anxiety problems. Those are real things. But then you're getting in all these little weird subcategories. Oppositional defiant, conduct disorder. Well, when in the 50s, those were called juvenile delinquents. Eventually, and a scientist out at Utah said that eventually all the diagnosis will go into neurology as these scanning technologies get developed. This scanner is so new now that it's like when the microscope was invented. Think about how far medical science went ahead. The first thing everybody did with the microscope was just go around and look at everything, because they were seeing stuff they never saw before. Ooh, look at all the little things that wiggle around that's on this.
I'm going to steal a term from Stephen Shore that he uses in his talks. He talks about sensory violations. And what are your, what will what throws you most in terms of like if you have to go out and speak? I know fluorescent lighting might be one. Stephen wears a hat. And what are your coping
When
strategies?
I'm speaking, what I find is rapid motion right up in front. Somebody's fanning themselves with a piece of paper. And when they had this monitor, they had it set up like they have a big monitor like this that would show my slides. Well, it turned off, and so its default position was to have a blue bar on the screen that every 5 seconds it just moved. Well, I couldn't do my talk with that distraction, and I asked somebody to turn the monitor around, and they did, or unplug it or something. You see, you have rapid motion right there in front of me. That's the thing that drives me the most crazy. If a cell phone goes off, I orient, and I have problems with those kind of distractions. And if somebody's waving a paper in the front row, tell them to stop it. You know, if they're texting or something like that in the front row, I say, you know, that text must be really, really interesting. I think you need to read it to the entire thing. I'll bring you a mic.
Sounds like 50s etiquette to me.
Yeah. They want to text, they need to do it in the back. I have to admit that I have read things during meetings, but I never do it in the front row. I do it in the back.
Is that so you can't be caught? It's one of those illegal, but kind of...
Well, I mean, if I have to, you know, I know I'm going to be getting phone calls, I sit in the back. So I can slip out easily. I don't sit up in the front row and disrupt the meeting.
So you touched on something. You were you were speaking at a conference, and the monitor wasn't working, and the blue bar came up. You self-advocated. You said,
I just said,
this is distracting, turn it around. How did you learn that skill? Because as parents, that is something that, and educators, we're trying to teach kids with autism
I don't know, I
how
never
to
had a problem with that. You
self-advocate.
see, I think some of this gets back, you see, in the 50s, all kids were just rigidly taught. And you'd ask nicely, turn it around, please. What I just would say, I'd point to someone in the front row and say, could you come up here and just turn this monitor around? The other thing I've learned, that's working in construction. You see, when you work in construction, you've got to get things done. You see, and I was working on a management, I designed things, but a management capacity in construction. And you'd have to get some materials. I remember one time at a job in the 80s, we had to get these silly little pieces of hardware. They were called hitch pins. And I went down, there were things about that long, little wire things. I went down to the hardware store, and they had one box. Well, I needed a case. And he said it would take 2 weeks to get it. Well, I copied off the name of the city and the manufacturer off the box in a hardware store. This is before there was internet. Go back to the office at the plant, called up the company, got information, called up the company, and I had them 2 days later by UPS. Well, you learn in construction getting stuff done. I learned that working on construction sites. It's an attitude of getting stuff done. If that monitor's bad, I would have gone down and turned it around. Then there's other distractions I have to tolerate. If it's in the back of the room, I got to tolerate it. If it's right up in the front, and I'm not going to wear stuff that's itchy. My student that had problems with the fluorescent lights, we disconnected the fluorescent lights in her cubicle at school. We asked to do that? No, we just got up there in the ceiling tiles and we just did it. See, this is something you learn in construction. I was doing a job in 1980 in Cincinnati. We had to rip out this old pig stockyard and totally rip out all the old wooden pens. And then we had to do a lot of concrete work in there. And the contractor blocked Hopple Street in Cincinnati with a cement truck. And I said, well, how'd you get away with that? He says, well, you do it at 10 o'clock in the morning when the traffic's light. You do it really fast. And if the police come around, you ask them to help. You ask them to direct traffic. That's something I learned working in construction. Sometimes you just got to do stuff. And it's because if you don't just do stuff, things don't get done. And working in construction, and you see, and also as a child, making things, you get an attitude of how do I solve a problem? Like I had these little silk scarf parachutes, and I'd throw them up in the air, and the strings would tangle. So then I figured out how to make a cross out of bent coat hangers and tape to tie the 4 strings to. Then I'd throw them up in the air, and they didn't tangle. Well, that's problem solving. You see, and I think today people are not learning problem solving. How do you just do things for yourself? It's like this dog. I was reading in this new book that's going to be coming out. It's a cute book. It's got a monkey on the cover of it. Can't remember the title. And they had outdoor dogs and indoor dogs, and then they took some dishes of yummy lunch meat, and they had a stick tied to it going under a fence. And if the dog pulled on the stick, he could get to the yummy lunch meat. And the outdoor dogs would pull the lunch meat out, and the indoor dog would just keep looking at the owner, asking him to do it. Well, I haven't learned any problem solving. It's the same thing. You know, this is why I'm such a big fan of the hands-on things, because projects don't always work. I ruined some sewing projects getting careless and doing things going too fast. You've got to learn how to fix things, how to not ruin stuff.
How to slow down, take it step by step.
Yep, that's right.
Okay. I was wondering, you know, you were talking about subgroups in terms of diet. Some kids can have gluten, casein. Are there things that gluten, casein, different restrictions that you have found that are irritants to your system?
I have found that my eczema that I have has gotten better. I'm not gluten-free. I try to restrict it. I don't eat pasta. I try to cut it way down, the amount of gluten I take in. I don't want the yucky. I think most of the gluten-free breads are horrible. And I don't eat any of that stuff. I mean, I just avoid bread. I just avoid pasta. I don't worry about the trace amounts, but I have found that these rashes that I have, if I keep the gluten way down, my rashes seem to be better. I don't go out and do experiments on it, but I mean, I used to just have eczema just all over me. And there's something going on with the gluten-free diet, because my student had a Shar-Pei that had disgusting fungal infections, in all its folds. And I just said, let's just for hacks, just for fun, put this dog on a gluten-free diet. And it worked. Didn't cure all the problems, but he definitely got better. This dog was just hideous with all these fungal infections. She was bathing it in cortisol every week, and cortisone ointment every week. Oh, it was awful.
So we were talking about the challenges of being in a hotel. I know I break out in rashes from the sheets because of the bleach and stuff. Do you find in your living area, are you using less toxic cleaning products?
I haven't done anything like that.
No?
I'm sort of like, I find that some hotels, I'll get into something that's allergic on what they used on the pillow, and then I put my T-shirt on the pillow. I've been in a few hotels where there were some cleaning things, but I don't go overboard on this stuff. I don't get into the ideology of it. You got to remember, worked on construction crews for 25 years, and we have got to figure out how to do stuff that the people that shop at Walmart can do. You know, for the other, if this was a free conference, we'd have another 500 people in here. What can they afford to do? So I like to figure out, how they can do the colored lenses at Walmart, and with colored paper they can get it to Kinko's FedEx print shop. I mean, one thing on the desensitizing to sound, you can do something as simple as take a smoke alarm, wrap it up in a ton of towels, and let the child turn it on, and then you gradually take the towels off, and they have to initiate it. Now, there are still sensory issues where you just get bombarded. You probably can't totally desensitize it. We need to learn more about how to treat it. We need to learn how to treat it in ways that are not expensive. There's a lot of people out there selling services. I don't sell any services. I only sell books, which contain information. But I have no axe to grind. I don't sell any services whatsoever to the autism community. I do sell some services to the livestock community, but not the autism community. But being a designer, I get a certain thrill out of when the student comes back and she bought pink sunglasses at Walmart, and now she's not flunking out of economics class. That turns me on. Because when I see these bad drawings, I pull the student aside and I tell them what they ought to do.
Get some pink glasses at Walmart?
Well, not necessarily pink, though. The thing is, you have to get the color that works. But usually, it tends to be the pinky, the purples. You can sometimes find glasses, the designer ones. You have to shop around and look. Sunglass Huts doesn't have a very good selection. Then some places do.
Go to the fashion section.
Fashion section.
Yeah.
You got to get the fashion ones.
Or the head shop, as you said.
Well, if you go to head shop, you can really get the right ones.
I'm not going to ask how you know that.
Okay.
I heard you speak a couple years ago when you were talking about backdoors into college. I know there are more than backdoors into college, but talk about some of the backdoors. How did college is difficult to navigate. My daughter's in college, and ADA doesn't cover all the needs.
Well, back doors are things like getting a professor that's interested by sending a portfolio to a specific professor. Go through the websites and look at the professor's publications, look up all their papers. You can do that now on the web. You couldn't do that before when I was doing these things. I had a horrible time. I got stuck in a triple room with 2 other roommates. That would not have worked. They changed that. Now, some of the problems I'm seeing today I did not have, like getting to class on time was not an issue. Interrupting classes and carrying on a dialogue with the professor, I never did that. You see, that's where the manners were taught. I didn't have a problem with the school part of it. My problems were all in the dorm. You know, they were kids that, you know, there was still teasing going on. That was hard. You know, the things that saved me was my science teacher was still around from high school, and I'd go visit him on weekends. So I still had him as support when I was in college. So that was really good. You know, getting involved in things like the school talent show. And that really made a lot of social breakthroughs. Again, activities doing where there's a shared interest. That's the sort of thing that you know, you've got to get into and do. Also, I was doing all this work experience. You know, I was still working at the ranch. I did the internship at a research lab where I had to rent a house with another lady. And then I did another job, and I had to stay in a room in a house with a lady. But that's, you've got to get out and do these things. Because I think a lot of these kids now are having more trouble than I had. You know, nobody helped me register for classes. I did that myself.
So do you think your work experience fostered some flexibility?
Yes, yes, absolutely. I mean, I can't emphasize enough this work experience. All the things I built, you know, and I had to figure out how to build them. Like I figured out, I was 15 when I made that gate, just like it was shown in the movie. You got to figure stuff out.
Do you ever, I know that in our schools today, my daughter was in a program where it was hands-on learning for graphic design, and yet sometimes our special ed kids are meant to, they have to meet certain academic requirements before they can access them.
Well,
Do you
that's
work
wrong.
with school districts
well,
at all on
that's
that?
wrong. I mean, they need to, you don't withhold art because you didn't meet some academic requirements. I've had art ever since a young age. I had access to art materials. That was always encouraged, all my art stuff. Also, it was broadened out. I would have done endless horse heads, just like kids do endless anime over and over again. Well, let's do anime's car. Let's do his house. You've got to work on broadening it out. Let's draw the whole horse. Let's make a horse out of clay, and I made a beautiful horse out of clay.
Well, Temple was talking earlier about the power of the internet, that there's a lot of free resources out there. I wanted to mention one, I don't know if you're aware of it, Temple, Project Spectrum. It was put out by Google, it's now Trimble, but it's a drawing program
Yes,
designed
SketchUp.
specifically.
Yes,
SketchUp.
and I think that's SketchUp, yes. And I didn't get to that slide. I actually have a slide on that. It's actually, Google's now sold that.
To Trimble.
Trimble, and we've got to get kids involved in those sort of things. The other thing they got to learn to do with that drawing program is how to do assignments that other people want. I think things like Lego Mindstorms robotics are really good, but they need to but they shouldn't be doing these projects solitary. You need to take 2 kids, one does computer programming, the other one builds mechanical parts of the robot, and they've got to work as a team, and the robot does an assigned task. Because you've got to learn how to do assigned tasks when you go to work. I've heard sad stories where a guy with Asperger's graduated from a major school of design, and then he just couldn't get his employer's stupid bird videos done that he didn't want to do. And then his job coach told me, well, he had executive function problems. I go, BS. That's BS. How'd you get through this fancy art school if he had executive function problems? He just didn't want to make stupid bird videos. Well, sometimes you've got to do work that maybe you don't really want to do. There was another lady that quit a really good job. She had a good boss. She had a good environment because she kind of just didn't like it, and she was lonely, and she made enough money she could fly home every weekend, an hour flight, and she quit this really fantastic job in a high-tech industry. And I'm going, and it's the one time I blew up at somebody at a book signing. I reamed her up and down. And she wrote back to me and said, you don't understand me. And I said, well, you know, the job you had in tech was a job that I would have wanted. and I couldn't do the programming and stuff like that that job would have. Now she's finding she's having trouble with medical insurance. But I reamed her up and down, because I asked her all the things. Does your boss mean? No. Do you have a quiet environment to work in? Yes. Can you do the work? And it was computer work. I can't, identify her, so I have to be a little bit vague how I describe it. But there was no problem with doing the work, the boss, the environment. She wasn't being bullied or anything. She just sort of didn't like it. Well, it's called work, excuse me. And she made enough money if she wanted to fly home every weekend, she could have flown home every weekend. There were plenty of flights for her to go on.
So I know that earlier, I don't know if you were 15, but you had some experience with key punch cards and programming.
Oh, that was
Do you want to talk a little bit about, I know you're fascinated with computers and the advances in technology and your experiences with key punch cards.
Well, yes, that was back when, when I was in 1968 in college. We actually had the same computer terminal that Bill Gates had, where you didn't have to use key punch cards. And I took a programming course and I couldn't do it. Bill Gates did it. I couldn't do it. We had access to the same state-of-the-art. A little college was just really lucky. The University of New Hampshire put that in my little college, but I couldn't talk to racks. That was just impossible. Then when I had to do my thesis, I had to put my data on punch cards, and it was like 5,000 cattle that I punched into like 5,000 individual cards. Oh, man. Think Excel mechanical. You sort things into slots. Excel mechanical. That's how this thing worked. And you had the cards, and the regular old cardboard airline boarding passes? Why a boarding pass is the size that it is? That's the evolutionary remnant of the IBM punch card, because those used to be on IBM punch cards. That's why boarding passes, the cardboard ones, the stiff ones, not the flimsy paper ones, but the stiff ones are the size that they are, because they still kept using that same size printer. It just didn't punch holes anymore. And so imagine having two boxes this long full of boarding passes. And each one of those boarding passes was an individual animal in my study. And so you'd have to get down there at 5 when you get a free key punch, and you go, then the card would go, the next card would go, and I would key punch until I had to go to the bathroom so bad I couldn't stand it anymore, because as soon as I got up, another student would get my machine. And then I was a super expert on the card sorter. Boy, I could fix all the card jams, and I would sometimes run 3 other students' work to get it done so I could get mine done, and you could do just one statistical test per night. And you'd hand in your card deck after you sorted it. And oh, man, when I tell my young students about that, they said, "You did what?" And I said, "Yeah."
Yeah, my kids go, "How did you ever survive without a laptop, Mom?" We didn't have laptops. You didn't have laptops.
No, you punched holes in boarding passes and
we didn't have cell phones. It's a new age.
I can remember operators on the phone before there were dial phones.
Calling 411. Is there 411
Our number
anymore?
was Dedham 30818. That was my childhood number.
I was hoping you could talk a little bit about what you're doing with your mom. You and your mom have undertaken some new endeavors. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you're doing?
Well, Mother's really interested in families and problems with the families, and been trying to work on programs to help the families deal with the stress of having autistic kids, problems with siblings. It was hard for my sister, that was a year and a half younger, to have a weird older sister when we were both in the same school together. The other 2 kids were young enough that we never went to school together, so it didn't affect them quite the same way. And then I got more attention than she did. Sibling issues can be definitely an issue. But compared to a lot of people, we had a good childhood. I mean, I think about all the good times we had when I was a child. There were problems, but there's a real problem with families just getting totally stressed out. I went down in Texas and I went to church, and they had a program where families with very handicapped kid. I'm talking about a real I'm not talking about an Asperger kid here. I'm talking about a real low-functioning autistic kid that's got other medical issues on top of it. Maybe they got a kid with CP really bad, and they get 4 hours of respite, and they would leave them off at the church, and the church would play games with them, and one couple just went out and sat in their car for 4 hours listening to the stereo just to chill out. They're just they're just so stressed out. I know people where they just can't, their child can't do any normal activities. Where with me, we could go out to a nice restaurant, we could go to a movie or something, and I would behave. They could do normal things with me, but where you have a really severe kid and you can't do normal stuff with them, it's really hard.
So I've never really heard you talk about your siblings. You must have had the normal sibling fights. My daughters fight.
Well, yeah, you always have that.
You always have that.
Yep.
Any tips to pass on to parents about maybe how to handle those
situations? Well, I
situations?
think you need to make sure that the siblings get some quality time to do things with them, that they don't get left out where all the attention gets to the autistic kid and the siblings don't get any attention. One thing Mother did try to do, my sister was very interested in theater, and she would take Isabella to some theater things that she was interested in and do theater, put on plays and stuff like that. She got very involved in that.
How many siblings do you have?
I have 2 sisters and a brother.
Oh, wow. Okay. Neat.
But 2 of the kids are a lot younger. See, my one sister's a year and a half younger, and it's probably hardest on her, but we also did a lot of good stuff together, too. The others never went to the same school together.
I actually ran through all my questions. Is there a closing thought or a subject you want to talk on?
Well, maybe we take some questions from the audience. Why don't we do that?
You want to do one?
Okay, right
We
there.
don't have time for a lot, but okay, I saw your hand up. Stand up.
Your anxiety as it got worse as you were older, was there anything particular that you really worried about or had?
Well, the problem with the anxiety as it got older, it's like my anti-predator. Imagine you just sort of, your system in your brain. There's been research now that shows that there's different kinds of fear. And there's a fear system in the brain like to protect you from predators and danger. And that system was just ramped up, going full blast. So yeah, I got anxious about all kinds of stupid things that normally most people wouldn't cause a total fear reaction. I was getting full-blown panic attacks, heart pounding and all of that. It worsened as I got older. And then I was getting more and more stress-related health problems, getting colitis so bad. You see in the movie I was eating all that yogurt, and the reason for that I had to eat all that yogurt was because the colitis was so bad, everything else went through me. And uncontrollable colitis, headaches so bad, and I went on the antidepressants. It stopped it. It like 90% cured the colitis and the headaches because I wasn't in a constant state of stress all the time. It was almost like I had biologically innate PTSD, where nothing bad had happened to cause that. It was just biology, and I've seen this in other visual thinkers. I mean, I've worked with other visual thinkers on designing meat plants. They're all on Prozac. When I was out at one of the Emmys, I talked to the wife of a famous director that I will keep confidential, does visually really fantastic movies, and we talked about his medication and he needed an exercise bike in his trailer and things like this. If he wasn't taking a little bit of Prozac and one of these medications, he would be on drugs and alcohol. Because the reason they get on drugs and alcohol is to self-medicate against that fear. And exercise helps. Got to get exercise. Do 100 sit-ups every single night. I wouldn't be able to sleep if I didn't do those 100 sit-ups every night. It took me 6 months to work up to that. Because you got to do some exercise that's really vigorous, that kind of gets the heart beating. A little slow walking, that doesn't do it. It's got to be vigorous. And I've got to have something I can do every night. I don't want to go down to the gym and be on display. I'd rather just do the 100 sit-ups on the bed, and then there's no excuse for not doing them. And I can do them in my night clothes. I don't have to be dressed.
You don't have to be in your workout
for display in the hotel gym.
Okay, we have time for one more. And before you answered, I could repeat it because we don't have a mic out in the audience. So I want everybody to hear it. Go ahead.
I'll stand up. I've got a loud voice. You said that you experienced bullying as a child.
Experienced what?
Bullying.
Bullying, okay.
Being teased.
Yep. Well, the question concerned bullying when I was a child. It was absolutely horrible. High school was absolutely the worst part of my life. Well, if there's one part of my life I'd like to get rid of, it would be high school. The other thing is, socializing with teenagers is not a life skill that I need to have. And
It's a short time in
there
life.
are some kids that need to go from being a child to being a grown-up. In Silicon Valley, they take the kids when they're about 8 and they apprentice them into computer programming. Some of them, they just take them out of school, finish them up online, just apprentice them into the trade, and they go from childhood to grown-uphood. Because most Asperger's get along just fine with grown-ups. And I think, I was one of the kids where I got along pretty well in elementary school. But high school was a disaster. I had to be taken out of a normal school. And there's some kids that need to be taken out of school, and they need to start being trained for work. And just finish the stuff up online. The social experience of teenage social experience, I don't need that. That's BS. And I had a horrible time. And the only places where I was not teased was the special activities. Horseback riding, electronics, and model rockets. The students that were interested in the specialized activities did not tease. So at least I had those refuges away from it. Now you've got all the bullying online. That makes it 10 times worse. Okay, because at least when I went riding, I could be away from it. My phone wouldn't be texting some horrible thing to me while I was riding. Or somebody be writing terrible things on my Facebook page or something like that. The cyberbullying stuff. So at least I had times where I could be away from it.
Okay.
Yes. Well, we got to be thinking a lot more about outcomes. And this is the same way I approach animal welfare. I developed a whole auditing program where I'm not going to tell somebody how to build a meat packing plant, but it has to achieve certain outcomes. If more than 3 of the cattle mooing their heads off while you're handling them, you fail the McDonald's audit. It's just that simple.
Thanks.
You've got to, let's look at our outcome. Our outcome is getting and keeping jobs, having some relationships as an adult. That's the outcome, but they got to keep and get jobs and not end up on Social Security. That needs to be the thing we got to be thinking about, and getting and keeping decent jobs, not just cleaning toilets. This is the other problem we've got on the job thing, is there's some people where maybe janitorial work would be appropriate, but I'm seeing too many smart Aspies being trained for a career in janitorial work. That's just wrong.
So we have to wrap it up. I want to thank Temple for sharing her time at a more personal level.